Best Irish music on irishradio.org with Jerry Byrne.
Irish Radio, I'm delighted to be speaking to a gentleman whose grandparents came from County Monaghan, and they actually had the name Monaghan as well, and Daniel has fond memories of them. This is a gentleman who made it in the charts, very much into music, has written self-penned songs, and done extremely well also. Daniel James, who grew up in Hartlepool in the northeast. Daniel, listen, it's lovely to speak to you.
Hello, Jerry. Fabulous to speak to you too. Great to be on your show. I think my grandparents will be looking down saying, "What took you so long, Daniel? What took you so long?"
You've done extremely well. I mean, you were a part of a group called Yell, and you got the name from a television program I believe you watched.
Well, I was watching this TV show when I was younger with do you know that TV personality from London called Janet Street Porter?
I do very well.
Yes, well, she was presenting this show, and it was obviously about oddballs and things like that. And apparently she went to this basement, this dungeon, and there was a guy in this dungeon. He wasn't chained up or anything, but he was challenging himself to get into the Guinness Book of the Guinness Book of Records, that he was going to yell for 24 hours. Well, I mean, I thought he was completely balmy, but I don't know why the name just stuck with me. And I woke up the next day, and I said to my other partner in the group and our manager, Jeff Chegwin, who was Keith Chegwin's twin brother, I said, "I've thought of a great name for the group," and I said Yell. And actually, I didn't expect them to like it, but they liked it. But there's an exclamation mark after the Yell, just to be fancy.
Right. Yes, well, that was Jeff Chegwin, who signed the band for Simon Cowell's Fanfare Records.
That's correct. Well, we were together a couple of years. I used to present children's BBC, and Jeff was a plugger at that time, and he used to come in a lot to try and get groups on. I was on this TV show called But First This with Sue Devaney, who now plays Kevin Webster's sister on Coronation Street, and she was on the show as well. And it was like, pop groups and cartoons and magazines and making things. And I was going up an escalator at Shepherd's Bush, and Jeff was coming down, and he said, "What are you doing?" I says, "Well, the series is finished now." He says, "What are you going to do next?" And I says, "Well, I'm going to go back to my first love, writing songs." He said, "Come in and see me and play me them." So I went in to see him, and he said, "I love your songs." He said, "But there's no room for solo artists at the moment. I'm going to introduce you to this other guy." So I met the other guy, and for 2 years I'd go to his house, write songs, and then Jeff had us out on the road. We'd be driving to Birmingham and Manchester and doing gigs at like 2 a.m. But we learned our trade. And then he'd also get us doing something called the lunch club, and we'd go around schools at lunchtime, and when they had their school dinners, we'd get up on stage afterwards and perform. The best bit of that was the dinner ladies, because we was running around the country, me and the other lad in the group, honing our craft, but we got skinnier and skinnier because we never got it to eat anything. So when we turned up at the schools, the dinner ladies would go, "Oh, boys, you look so thin," and they'd pile us with dinner. So we used to love doing the schools. Anyway, we basically built up a good fan base, and Jeff said it's time to do showcases. So we did a big showcase at No Miss Studios in near Olympia in London, and CBS Records came, which is now Sony, and Simon Cowell came, who had Fanfare Records. And I actually didn't want to sign with Simon to start with, not because he was a bad man, but I didn't want to be a cover version band. And Simon was into cover versions. I wrote songs. I saw myself as a singer-songwriter. So I was resistant, but in the end, my arm was twisted, and we ended up signing with Simon Cowell. And from there, we just went from strength to strength.
Indeed. Now, the first song that you had a hit with was actually a cover. It was a cover of Dan Hartman's 1970s hit, Instant Replay. It was produced by Nigel Wood, and it was remixed by Pete Hammond at PWL, who was huge at the time. So in January in 1990, you hit the UK singles charts.
It was amazing. It was amazing time. Do you remember it coming out?
I do well. Yes, indeed. I remember it well.
Do you know what? we nearly didn't. You know how that came about? Simon and I had been butting heads for months because I kept playing him new song after new song after new song, wanting him to come out, and he wanted to do a cover. And my other half in the band, we were so tired, we went to Ibiza for a week, and on the last night we were there, we were sitting in a chill out bar at 2 a.m. It was dead as a dodo, and suddenly we heard 10, 9, 8. And the original version by Dan Hartman came on, and the floor filled. But it didn't just fill with women; guys got up as well. And you know what? You know a song's good if both sexes are enjoying it. And I looked at the guy in the group, Paul, and I said, you know, Simon wanted us to do a cover. I said, if we're going to do one, this is the one we should do. So we went back to London, and Simon was sitting in his office, and typical Simon, he was all suntanned and looking like James Bond's son. And we walked in, and we were two young guys. We were all tanned and cool. We thought we were the bee's knees. We walked in. He hadn't even been on holiday, and he was browner than we were. Anyway, I said, Simon, we've got some good news. We've found a cover. And he swung his legs off the table and said, oh, boys, tell me which song. And he dropped this book. So I went down to pick the book. And as I picked the book up, I looked at Simon and said, Instant Replay, Dan Hartman. And he said, open the book. And the book fell over. And the night before, he sleeps with the blooming Guinness Book of Singles under his bed. And the night before, he'd actually been thumbing through it, and he'd folded over the corner page, Dan Hartman Instant Replay. So I thought, well, Daniel, you've been so resistant to this. It must be meant to be. And I just went with it from that moment onwards. And we recorded it, and we did 30 magazine covers for the first record. We were on telly all over the world. I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
That is phenomenal. Now you also had more hits with the group, and you turned to your acting career as well, appearing in the USA, where you featured in several films and television series, including Apartment for 8 as a rock drummer and that. Now you returned to the UK, and you appeared in EastEnders, Coronation Street, Casualty, Doctors, and more. So you're a pretty well known face.
Well, you know. To be honest with you, Yale was an incredible experience. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. We never had a day off in 4 years, but it ended very badly. It ended overnight. Nobody told me. Nobody warned me. There was politics behind the scenes I didn't know about. I woke up one morning, opened the Daily Mirror, and the group was dead. And I suffered very badly. I lost everything overnight. I was buying my mum and dad a home. It was heartbreaking. And I disappeared. I literally left the business. I didn't think I'd ever sing again. I took it very, very badly. Even though it was nothing to do with me, I kind of blamed myself. And in the end, I ended up moving to New York, and nobody knew me there. And there was a big Irish community there, as you know. And I ended up staying in New York. I did a play off Broadway, and then I moved to LA, and I did a TV. I was in a TV series called Passions. Did an episode of that, and then I was going from strength to strength, and then I came back to England, and you see, I just never thought I'd ever sing again. I was so wounded. So I just went back into acting. And as you say, I was in Corrie, played a really suspicious detective that arrested Steve MacDonald. And I was in Last Tango in Halifax, playing a priest who buried somebody. And then just before lockdown, I was in EastEnders, and I had a big argument with Phil Mitchell. Phil Mitchell, as you know, in EastEnders, if you watch it, nobody crosses the Mitchell brothers. Well, I did, and I survived, only just. Basically, I turn up at the car lot, and Phil sold me a dodgy motor, and I go there to have a big rock with him. But I'm confronted by his son, Ben, who's, as people will know, he's deaf. So I have this huge row with him, and he can't hear me. And the BBC, what they did was they lowered the volume on some of my dialogue so that people at home would understand what it's like for a deaf person. Because unless you're facing a deaf person front on, they cannot read your lips, you know? So the whole point of the storyline was to help people understand how difficult it is for deaf people if you don't look at them when you're talking. Anyway, to cut long story short, I had this big argument with him, stormed off, and then jumped in my car, and in my anger, reversed my car over his daughter. So I fully expected to go back and that the Mitchell brothers would sort me out, as they do on EastEnders. But suddenly we had lockdown, and everything went dead. All the storylines were lost. And so I never got to go back to EastEnders. But you never know, one day I could end up on the square playing another part.
Indeed. So it's, I must say, you know, when you say about the group sort of disappearing overnight and you only finding out in a newspaper the next morning, I mean, the number of times stories like this have come out, it's truly sad.
I think when you're young and you've put your heart, I mean, it happened. Listen, I'm no different to the working man. Look what happened to the miners in the 80s. Thatcher decimated the mines, and they woke up one morning and had nothing. Lots of people can be made redundant and lose everything overnight. Just because I'm in a group, it doesn't mean I'm anything special. But we react in the same way to loss. And the sad thing for me was, you see, you have HR, you have a union. Well, no, pop stars don't have that. I didn't know anyone. My mum and dad are working class people. I had nobody to turn to. Nowadays I open the paper and, a pop star has a trauma and Elton John swoops them up and brings them back to life. Well, I didn't have Elton John's phone number. I'd never met him. So I literally, I went to my mum and dad's when I was broken, and they just, they did the best they could, but they didn't know how to handle someone that lost everything in the music business, So it was very hard for me. And I would say to anybody who goes into the music business, it's the most amazing experience, but get yourself a good lawyer. Don't believe everything you're told. And also insist that rest periods are built into your schedule, because they work. I understand why they work groups to the bone, because they want to recoup their money that they've invested in you. But the problem is, unless when you're young, when you're working 24/7 for 4 years on the trot, unless you get a break and go and mix with your friends, your normal everyday friends, you become exhausted, you lose perspective, and it's very easy when you lose everything to fall apart. And I think it's a common story that happens to a lot of groups, and it's a shame.
Indeed, but possibly that's why you're also keen on health and fitness, and you're actually a trained fitness instructor.
You know what the truth is, Jerry? I was a very short. I'm very tall now. I'm over 6 foot. But when I was younger, you see, I take after my granddad, Patrick. But when I was younger, I was a bit chubby, and I wasn't into sport or anything. And I was probably about 13, 14, 15, just the age when you go to secondary school or senior school, and people, girls are looking at you, you're looking at girls and whatever. And I decided, on the quiet, nobody knew, because I was just, I was the kid that got picked second last on the football team, and it was horrible. So I waited till my mum and dad had gone to bed, and I'd sneak out of the house and I'd go out for a run in the dark. I didn't want anyone to know, because obviously I was a fat blob running up the road, and I can describe myself as a fat blob because I was, but I wanted to do something about it. And I would go out in the dark and run to a village near where we lived, and then run back. I mean, the run to start with was more like a crawl. But you know what? After a month, after 2 months, after 3 months, the weight was dropping off me. And I got to 15, and suddenly I sprouted up and I was slim. And I realized that the only way I would control my weight was if I used fitness, because you can't starve yourself. You need your food, especially when you're a growing teenager. So I used fitness to keep my weight down. And then after lockdown, I didn't have a career. And what happened was, when I came back from America, I looked after my mum, because my mum became very poorly, and I moved my mum in with me, and I looked after her. I became a full-time carer. I left the business again. I put the business on ice, and I looked after my mum for 10 years. And then sadly, I mean, we were very close and I wouldn't have missed it for the world, but she passed away just before lockdown. And when she passed away, I was totally lost. I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was. So the only way I started to get it back was I decided to take a course to become a fitness instructor. And standing at the front of a class with music was a little bit like performing. It gave me a similar adrenaline rush. So it kind of not only fed my artistic side, but it kept my weight down. And that's how I ended up training to be a fitness instructor, purely because when my mum passed away, I didn't know what to do with myself.
Wow, well done. That's definitely time well spent. Now, recently you had a top 20 Heritage chart hits with self-penned songs, Set Your Spirit Free and Don't Want to Lose That Girl. Fast forward to here we are, 2022, and you're releasing your latest self-penned single, Do You Remember Me? It's we'll hear it in a moment. It's a soulful track with some silky vocals and some great beats.
Well, that's really kind of you. Thank you so much. To be honest with you, as I say, when lockdown came, I was on my own. All my family were miles away, and I used to go out for a walk every day. And I'd been watching the TV news like we all did, and it was so tragic at the start of lockdown. And this one day I'd seen this old lady in a care home, and she literally put her hand up against the glass because her daughter wasn't allowed in. And this old lady had dementia, and it was heartbreaking to watch. And I know a lot of people went through terrible times. And I went out for a walk, and one night I started to these words just came out of my mouth. When the world turns its head, there are people around me with their hearts in their mouths, not knowing the right way they should turn, watching hair turning grey, seeing children turn into adults, days running away, it's falling apart at the seams. Do you know what? It came out of nowhere, and I ran home, sang it into my phone, went to bed, got up the next day, and I thought, I don't believe this. So for the next 6 weeks, I went out every night and I wrote songs. I just kept writing song after song after song. Bear in mind, I've not written songs for decades. I've not sang for decades. I mean, it was alien to me. Anyway, as the lockdowns eased, I booked a studio and thought, dare I do it? Dare I have a go? And I went in the studio, and you know what? I sang the first couple of lines, and the engineer stopped and he played it back to me. And when I heard it come back, I thought, you idiot. You idiot. I realized how much I loved singing and how much I loved being in the studio and all of that. And I thought, it was you. You stopped yourself. You know, you took it really badly, the breakup, yes. But, you know, I didn't allow myself to enjoy something that I did and that I loved. I stopped myself because of this loss. So I would say to anybody listening, if you're getting bullied or if anything bad's happening to you, you know, if you're losing confidence, don't turn it in on yourself. There's always another day. Look for help. Tell people how you're feeling, because, you know, I bottled it all up inside of me and never sang for decades and wasted years. So, as I say, I recorded, eventually got me confidence back, recorded all these new songs, and I put them up on like Spotify and Deezer and iTunes and Apple. And suddenly, because in lockdown, local radio and community radio were so needed, they were so needed and so popular. All these community stations and little stations were ringing me up saying, we've been playing instant replay and Let's Go Round again, and we now see you've got new material. Well, suddenly they were all ringing me up, and it was like, I couldn't believe myself. I was pinching myself. It was like I had a career again out of nowhere. And then Mike Reed, the brilliant, you know, Radio 1 DJ and singer-songwriter and poet, put a chart together in lockdown called the Heritage Chart. And it's for artists who had hits in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's an avenue for them because there's nowhere for them to go. And, you know, Culture Club, Duran Duran, Toya, you know, Nick Kershaw, they're all writing material. And they couldn't find an outlet. So Mike put the Heritage Chart together. And since lockdown, it's been going from strength to strength. He now has a Heritage Chart TV series. It goes out in 73 countries. And it's on, you know, people's local Channel 7. It's on Talking Pictures TV a couple of times a week. It's on Expat TV. It's absolutely everywhere. And he has a radio show to go with it. And so my two songs, Set Your Spirit Free, which was about coming out of lockdown, and Don't Wanna Lose That Girl, they were top 20 hits in the Heritage Chart. And now my new single, which has just come out yesterday, it was announced it was #1 in the Heritage Chart. You could have knocked me down with a feather. I am jumping. You've rang me, you've called me today when I've just come out as #1 in the Heritage Chart, and I'm walking on air. So I just want to say a huge thank you to anybody who's heard the song and has voted. I am really grateful. And if they haven't voted yet, please go online to the Heritage Chart and click on vote now and scroll down. You haven't got far to scroll. Scroll to #1 and give Daniel your vote. I would be so grateful.
Absolutely fantastic, and well done on it. And as you say, artists from the the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, really they actually, bar this Heritage Chart, they really have no place to go, such as the way that things are today and the change in style of music. But it doesn't mean that artists who were around in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were no good just because they're not hip and trendy today.
You know what? The people that were my fans in the 90s. And other people's fans in the 90s are all older now. Their mums, dads, grandparents. They still like music. They still love music. And yeah, they still like the stuff I did in the 90s. But they're still supporting me, and they like the new stuff I'm doing now. Audiences have grown up with these artists. All the famous people from the 80s and 90s, all their fans have grown up at the same time, so they need new music as well, and they're chuffed that all these bands and artists, Kim Wilde's knocking the new songs out. It's amazing. It's basically, this chart, Mike Reed's Heritage Chart, has given us all a new lease of life, and audiences are loving it, because if you think about it, the biggest demographic at the moment are the over 50s to 80-year-olds. They're the biggest demographic in the country, and they want music. They haven't just suddenly stopped liking music because they've got to 50.
Exactly. I have to say, listen, Daniel, well done on everything. Well done with the group Yell, also with your acting, and well done on your the fitness as well, and also your new music. It's been lovely to speak to you.
Thank you so much for having me on. And I know this might sound corny and stuff, but I can't wait to get to Belfast on Thursday. I want to do, I'm doing this TV show, and then I'm going to go to the cool studios. And I just know my granddad. I know Patrick Monaghan and my grandma Katie Callahan will be looking down. I was in Belfast with Yell. We did concerts. So I've not been to Belfast since the 90s. So I'm really looking forward, and I'm hoping at some point in the next year I can get over to Monaghan, because as my granddad used to say when he put me on his knee, Monaghan's yours, because he was called Monaghan. He used to pretend when I was a little boy that we owned Monaghan. Right. I think they'll be a bit shocked when I turn up there. They'll be saying, "No, you don't." And my mum's one of my mum's sisters was a nun in Ireland as well. From about 14 years of age, she trained. So I just want to get over there and see everybody.
Great, and you're doing that work with the youth project over in Belfast.
Cool Studios in Newton, in Rathcoole in Belfast. It's a youth project. They go every day after school, and it's all creative. They get to do so many creative things there, and that's what we need with young people, because there's the government aren't putting money into things, and it's these kind of projects that we need to get behind, because it gives them a future, it gives them confidence, it gives them self-belief. Whether they go into entertainment or not, it doesn't matter. It just means they walk around with their head held high, keeps them off the streets, but it also gives them some, where they put their energies, and it gives them confidence.
Exactly. Daniel, listen, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. As I said, well done on everything, and hope to catch up with you soon.
Thank you, mate, and my best wishes to you and your listeners. Cheers.
So much it plays on my mind. I didn't know you felt that way. You never said a word. You planned inside to walk away and prove to me you never really cared. Do you remember? It's hard to let things go. It's painful inside to hang on to the past. I need to shake this off. I want to move on. Takes courage to try. The things we planned are over now. I've got to time, I realize that living was the best for us both. don't see you.